The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at Thunderbolt Air Station as Lieutenant Sarah Chen walked toward the briefing room, her flight helmet tucked under her arm. Around her, the roar of F-16 Fighting Falcons filled the air as the Dawn Patrol prepared for takeoff. The sound that had once thrilled her now felt like a constant reminder of everything she wasn't allowed to do. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At 26, Sarah had been flying transport missions and training exercises for 3 years, watching as her male counterparts were selected for combat squadrons while she remained grounded in support roles. The official reason was always the same: insufficient combat readiness scores, lack of aggressive tactics, unsuitable temperament for air-to-air engagement. The unofficial reason, whispered in ready rooms and maintenance hangars, was simpler. She just didn't have what it took to be a real fighter pilot. The briefing room at Thunderbolt Air Station buzzed with the usual pre-mission energy as pilots filed in for the morning intelligence update. Squadron Leader Marcus Reeves stood at the front, reviewing his notes while waiting for the room to settle. The walls were lined with photographs of the unit's top performers, their names etched in gold beneath images of men who had earned their places through demonstrated aerial superiority. Lieutenant Sarah Chen slipped into a seat near the back. As had become her habit over the past 3 years, her presence in these briefings was more formality than necessity, since she rarely flew anything more challenging than cargo runs to Allied bases or routine patrol missions over friendly territory. The other pilots barely acknowledged her arrival, their attention focused on the tactical displays and mission parameters that would define their day. Captain Jake Morrison, the squadron's leading ace with 7 confirmed kills, leaned back in his chair and gestured toward the mission board. "Looks like another milk-run escort mission," he said to his wingman, Lieutenant Tom Bradley. "Sarah's probably hoping she gets to tag along and maybe see some real action for once." Bradley chuckled quietly. "Come on, Jake. She's been here 3 years and still can't pass the advanced combat scenarios. Some people just aren't cut out for air-to-air combat. Nothing wrong with being a transport pilot." The conversation wasn't particularly quiet, and several other pilots turned to listen. Sarah kept her eyes fixed on her mission folder, having learned long ago that responding to such comments only made things worse. She had tried defending herself in the early days, explaining her tactical theories or questioning the scoring systems used in training exercises, but it had only earned her a reputation as someone who made excuses instead of results. "I heard she actually requested combat assignment again last month," added Captain Rick Steinberg, shaking his head in mock sympathy. "Command turned her down faster than a Sidewinder locks on target. Apparently her psych evaluation showed insufficient killer instinct." Squadron Leader Reeves called for attention, ending the casual conversation, but Sarah had heard enough. The same themes echoed through every interaction she had with her squadron mates: insufficient aggression, lack of killer instinct, too cautious in engagement scenarios. The evaluations painted a picture of someone who might be technically competent, but fundamentally unsuited for the mental demands of aerial combat. What none of them knew was that Sarah had been deliberately holding back during training exercises, not out of fear or inability, but because she had learned something during her civilian pilot training that hadn't been included in any military manual. Her instructor, a retired Navy pilot named Commander Elena Vasquez, had taught her that the most dangerous opponents were often those who revealed nothing about their true capabilities until the moment of absolute necessity. Remember, Vasquez had told her during a particularly challenging flight lesson, in real combat, the pilot who shows all their skills in training is the pilot whose opponents know exactly how to beat them. Sometimes the smartest move is to let people underestimate you until it matters most. Sarah had taken that advice to heart, perhaps too much so. 3 years of deliberately mediocre performance had created a reputation that seemed impossible to overcome. Every training exercise, where she held back her real abilities, reinforced the perception that she simply wasn't fighter pilot material. The irony was that she had become so good at appearing average that even she sometimes wondered if she was fooling herself about her real capabilities. The morning briefing covered routine matters, weather conditions, radio frequencies, maintenance, updates on various aircraft. Sarah listened with half her attention while reviewing the transport mission she had been assigned. Another cargo run to Firebase Delta, carrying supplies and mail to troops stationed near the disputed border region. It was important work, but it wasn't the kind of mission that would ever prove she belonged in a combat squadron. As the briefing concluded and pilots began filing out to their aircraft, Sarah noticed Squadron Leader Reeves approaching her position. She straightened in her chair, wondering if there had been a change to her mission parameters. "Chen," Reeves said, his voice carrying the formal tone he used for official communications. "I wanted to let you know that your request for advanced combat training has been reviewed again." Sarah felt a familiar tightening in her chest. She had submitted the paperwork 6 weeks ago, hoping that her consistent performance in transport missions might finally open doors to more challenging assignments. "And the decision, sir?" Reeves sat down beside her, his expression suggesting he was about to deliver unwelcome news as gently as possible. "The review board feels that your current role suits your skill set appropriately. They've recommended you consider specializing in logistics coordination or possibly transitioning to training new transport pilots." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, though she kept her expression neutral. 3 years of service, thousands of flight hours, perfect mission completion rates, and the best they could offer was a sideways move into administrative roles. "Sir, with respect, I've been requesting combat evaluation for over a year. Shouldn't I at least have the opportunity to demonstrate my capabilities under real conditions?" "Chen, I know this isn't what you want to hear, but the Combat Evaluation Board has access to all your training records. Your scores in air-to-air scenarios consistently rank in the bottom third of your peer group. Your tactical decision-making shows excessive caution, and your weapons accuracy rates, while adequate, don't approach the levels we need for frontline combat roles." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah wanted to explain that her poor performance was intentional, that she had been holding back to avoid revealing her true capabilities. But saying so would sound like the desperate excuse of someone who couldn't accept reality. Instead, she nodded professionally. "I understand, sir. Thank you for the update." Reeves studied her face carefully. "Look, Chen, there's no shame in being a support pilot. The work you do is essential, and you do it well. Not everyone can be a fighter ace, and the military needs people who can handle the less glamorous, but equally important missions." After Reeves left, Sarah remained in the empty briefing room for several minutes, staring at the photographs of successful pilots that lined the walls. Every face belonged to someone who had proven themselves in aerial combat, earning their place through demonstrated superiority over enemy aircraft. The newest addition was Captain Morrison's photo, commemorating his 7th kill from a mission 3 months earlier. She wondered what Commander Vasquez would think of her situation now. The strategy of concealing her abilities had protected her from being seen as a threat by her peers, but it had also trapped her in a role that offered no path forward. Perhaps it was time to abandon the careful facade and finally show what she was truly capable of, regardless of the consequences. But as she walked toward the flight line to prepare for her cargo mission, Sarah realized that the opportunity to prove herself might never come. Combat assignments went to pilots with proven track records, and she had spent 3 years building a record that suggested she was exactly what everyone believed her to be: competent but unremarkable, reliable but not exceptional. The F-16C, assigned to her transport mission, gleamed in the morning sunlight, its Pratt & Whitney engine already being prepped by the ground crew. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez supervised the fuel loading while his team completed final systems checks. Sarah had worked with Rodriguez's crew dozens of times, and they had developed an efficient working relationship based on mutual professionalism. "Morning, Lieutenant," Rodriguez called as Sarah approached. "Cargo's all loaded and secured. Weather looks good for your run to Firebase Delta. Should be a smooth flight." "Thanks, Chief. Any maintenance issues I should know about?" Rodriguez consulted his checklist. "All systems green. This bird just came out of major service last week, so everything's running perfectly. Though I have to ask, you ever get tired of hauling cargo instead of hunting targets?" It was a question Sarah had heard variations of many times, usually asked with genuine curiosity rather than malice. Rodriguez and his crew understood the technical demands of flying high-performance aircraft, even if the missions weren't glamorous. "Someone has to keep the bases supplied, Chief. Can't all be dogfighting aces." "Maybe not," Rodriguez agreed. "But seems like a waste having someone with your stick skills running milk runs. I've watched you handle this aircraft, Lieutenant. You've got instincts that most of the hotshots in this squadron would kill for." Sarah paused in her pre-flight inspection. It was rare for anyone to comment positively on her flying abilities, and Rodriguez's observation caught her off guard. "What do you mean?" "Little things," Rodriguez explained. "Checking the missile pylons even though no weapons were mounted for the cargo mission. The way you read weather patterns, how you adjust for wind conditions without thinking about it. Your feel for the aircraft's limits. Most pilots have to think through those adjustments. You just know." The comment stayed with Sarah as she completed her pre-flight routine and climbed into the cockpit. Rodriguez had noticed subtleties in her flying that she had tried to keep hidden, suggesting that completely concealing her abilities might be impossible. If a ground crew chief could see through her carefully maintained facade, perhaps her squadron mates were also aware that she was holding back. The flight to Firebase Delta took 2 hours through clear skies and light winds. Sarah used the time to practice advanced maneuvers that weren't part of standard transport protocols, testing her aircraft's responses and her own reflexes. At 30,000 feet with no other traffic in sight, she could safely explore the boundaries of both machine and pilot without anyone observing her techniques. She started with basic energy management exercises, accelerating and decelerating, while maintaining precise altitude control. Then she moved to more complex maneuvers, barrel rolls that maintained perfect heading, split S turns that bled speed efficiently, and high G climbs that tested both her physical conditioning and her understanding of the aircraft's performance envelope. Each maneuver was executed with a precision that would have surprised her training instructors. The radio crackled with routine communications between air traffic control and other aircraft in the region. Sarah monitored the chatter while practicing intercept geometry calculations in her head, working through scenarios where she might need to engage hostile aircraft. It was a mental exercise she performed on every flight, keeping her tactical thinking sharp even when flying non-combat missions. "Thunderbolt Transport 7, this is Firebase Delta Control," came the radio call as Sarah approached her destination. "We have you on radar, cleared for landing on runway 27. Wind is light and variable. Firebase Delta Control, Thunderbolt Transport 7. Roger. Cleared to land runway 27. The landing was smooth and precise, touching down exactly on the 1,000-foot markers with minimal runway usage. Sarah taxied to the cargo unloading area where ground personnel were already waiting with forklifts and equipment carts. The efficiency of the operation reflected months of practice, with cargo containers transferred from aircraft to storage areas in less than 20 minutes. During the brief turnaround, Sarah struck up a conversation with Major Lisa Park, the base operations officer who supervised cargo transfers. Park was a veteran pilot herself, having flown combat missions before transitioning to administrative duties following an injury that had ended her flying career. "How are things back at Thunderbolt?" Park asked while reviewing the cargo manifest. "Still hoping to break into the fighter squadrons?" "Still trying," Sarah replied diplomatically. "Competition is pretty fierce for combat assignments." Park studied Sarah's face with the perceptive look of someone who had navigated similar challenges. "You know, I flew with some of the pilots in your squadron back in the day. Good stick and rudder. Skills, most of them, but sometimes I wonder if the selection process focuses too much on training scores and not enough on real-world judgment." "What do you mean?" "Combat isn't like training exercises," Park explained. "In training, everything follows predictable patterns. Enemy aircraft behave according to known parameters. Weapon systems work perfectly, and tactical situations develop logically. Real combat is messy, unpredictable, and often comes down to making split-second decisions with incomplete information." Sarah nodded, though she wondered where Park was heading with the observation. "That makes sense. Training can only simulate so much." "Exactly. And sometimes the pilots who perform best in controlled training environments aren't the ones who adapt best when everything goes sideways." Park signed off on the cargo transfer and handed the paperwork back to Sarah. "Just something to think about. The next time you're in a training scenario, try approaching it like a real combat situation instead of an exercise to be scored." The return flight to Thunderbolt Air Station gave Sarah time to consider Park's advice. She had been treating training exercises as performances to be carefully managed rather than opportunities to develop real combat skills. Perhaps it was time to abandon the strategy of deliberate mediocrity and start demonstrating her actual capabilities, regardless of what it revealed to potential opponents. But as she approached Thunderbolt and received landing clearance, Sarah realized that changing her approach now might be too late. 3 years of establishing a reputation as an adequate but unexceptional pilot couldn't be overcome overnight. Any sudden improvement in her performance would be viewed with suspicion, possibly leading to accusations that she had been sandbagging or deliberately underperforming. The landing at Thunderbolt was routine, and Sarah taxied to the parking area where Rodriguez's ground crew was waiting to secure the aircraft. As she shut down the engines and completed her post-flight checklist, she noticed unusual activity. Around the Squadron Operations Building, several staff cars with official markings were parked outside, and personnel were moving with the purposeful urgency that usually indicated developing situations. "Chief," Sarah called to Rodriguez as she climbed down from the cockpit, "what's all the commotion about?" Rodriguez glanced toward the operations building, then moved closer to speak quietly. "Word is there's been some kind of incident near the border. Intelligence briefing called for all squadron commanders about an hour ago. Could be nothing, but could be something big developing." Sarah felt a familiar stirring of anticipation mixed with frustration. If a real crisis was developing, it would once again be handled by the combat-rated pilots while she remained on the sidelines. 3 years of careful preparation and hidden skill development would mean nothing if she never had the opportunity to prove herself under actual combat conditions. As she secured her personal equipment and prepared to file her post-mission report, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. The next time she found herself in a training scenario or evaluation exercise, she would abandon the facade of mediocrity and demonstrate exactly what she was capable of. The risks were significant. Revealing her true abilities might create enemies among pilots who had grown comfortable with their assumptions about her limitations, but continuing to hide her potential was becoming unbearable. What Sarah didn't know was that events were already in motion that would soon make her decision irrelevant. The intelligence briefing in the operations building was discussing intercepted communications, suggesting a major enemy offensive was being planned. One that would require every available pilot, regardless of their current assignment or reputation. Within days, she would face the choice between maintaining her carefully constructed identity and stepping forward when her country needed every skilled pilot it could find. The afternoon sun was setting behind the mountains as Sarah walked toward the officers' quarters, her mind still processing the events of the day and the decision she had made. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and for the first time in 3 years, she was prepared to meet them with her full capabilities revealed. The consequences might be unpredictable, but continuing to hide her abilities had become impossible. In the operations building, Squadron Leader Reeves was receiving classified intelligence that would soon change the dynamics of the entire squadron. Enemy forces were massing for what appeared to be a coordinated assault on multiple Allied positions, supported by advanced fighter aircraft that would challenge even the most experienced pilots. The coming days would test every pilot in the squadron, regardless of their training scores or reputation. Sarah Chen was about to discover that sometimes the greatest opportunities come disguised as the greatest challenges, and that 3 years of careful preparation might finally have a purpose she had never anticipated. The emergency klaxon pierced the pre-dawn silence at Thunderbolt Air Station, jolting pilots from their sleep in the officers' quarters. Sarah Chen rolled out of bed instantly, her military training overriding the grogginess of interrupted sleep. The urgent wail of the alarm system meant only one thing: a real-world crisis that required immediate response from all available aircraft and personnel. She dressed quickly in her flight suit, muscle memory guiding her through the routine even as her mind raced through possibilities. Emergency scrambles were rare at Thunderbolt, usually reserved for actual threats to national security or allies. Under direct attack. As she rushed toward the squadron building, Sarah could see lights coming on throughout the base and personnel emerging from barracks and quarters with the purposeful urgency that marked professional military response. The squadron briefing room was already crowded when Sarah arrived, pilots filling seats normally reserved for routine morning updates. The atmosphere was electric with tension and anticipation, conversations conducted in hushed tones as everyone waited for official information about the developing situation. Squadron Leader Reeves stood at the front with Colonel Patricia Hayes, the wing commander, while intelligence officers prepared classified briefing materials. Captain Morrison and his usual circle of combat-rated pilots occupied the front rows, their body language radiating the confidence of men who knew they would be central to whatever response was being planned. Sarah took her customary position near the back, but for the first time in 3 years, she found herself hoping that the situation might be serious enough to require every available pilot, regardless of their current assignment status. Colonel Hayes called for attention, and the room fell silent immediately. Her expression was grim as she activated the main briefing display, showing a tactical map of the border region where Firebase Delta and several other Allied positions were marked in red. Ladies and gentlemen, at approximately 0300 hours, our intelligence assets detected massive enemy force movements, suggesting an imminent large-scale offensive against Allied positions along the disputed border. The map updated to show enemy troop concentrations, armored formations, and most concerning to the assembled pilots, significant air assets including advanced fighter aircraft that intelligence had not previously known to be in the region. Sarah studied the display carefully, noting the tactical implications of the enemy positions and the challenges they would present to any defensive response. The enemy appears to be preparing a coordinated assault on multiple targets simultaneously. Hayes continued. Firebase Delta, Outpost Charlie, and Forward Operating Base Sierra are all under immediate threat. Our ground forces are outnumbered approximately 4-1, and enemy air superiority could make the difference between successful defense and catastrophic loss of life. Squadron Leader Reeves stepped forward to address the tactical situation. Intelligence indicates the enemy has deployed at least 30 advanced fighters to support their ground offensive. Our available combat aircraft in the immediate region total 18 F-16s from this squadron, plus limited support from neighboring units. We're looking at odds that will challenge every pilot and every aircraft we can put in the air. Captain Morrison raised his hand. Sir, what's the timeline for enemy action? How long do we have to prepare our response? Best estimates suggest the enemy offensive will begin at dawn, approximately 4 hours from now, Hayes replied. That gives us very little time to plan, brief, and launch defensive operations. Every minute will count, and we cannot afford to hold anything in reserve. The implications were clear to everyone in the room. This would not be a selective deployment of the squadron's most experienced combat pilots. The mathematics of the situation demanded that every available aircraft and every qualified pilot be committed to the defense, regardless of their training scores or previous assignments. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she realized that the moment she had been preparing for might finally be arriving. 3 years of hidden skill development and carefully concealed capabilities had positioned her for exactly this type of crisis, where desperate circumstances might override the normal selection criteria that had kept her grounded in support roles. Sir, came a voice from the middle of the briefing room, what about our transport and support pilots? Will they be required for this mission? Colonel Hayes exchanged glances with Squadron Leader Reeves before responding. Given the scale of the threat and the limited number of combat-rated pilots available, we're going to need every pilot who can safely operate an F-16 in a combat environment. That includes personnel currently assigned to transport and support missions. The statement sent a ripple of murmurs through the assembled pilots. Several of the combat veterans turned to look at Sarah and the few other support pilots present, their expressions ranging from concern to skepticism. The idea of relying on non-combat pilots in a major air-to-air engagement clearly made them uncomfortable. Captain Bradley leaned toward Morrison and spoke in a stage whisper that carried across the quiet room. This is getting desperate if they're talking about putting cargo pilots in fighters against advanced enemy aircraft. That's not going to end well for anybody. Sarah kept her expression neutral, but internally she was calculating the tactical parameters of the developing situation. 30 enemy fighters against 18 allied aircraft meant that individual pilot skill would be absolutely critical. There would be no room for passengers or pilots who couldn't pull their weight in aerial combat. Every aircraft would need to be flown by someone capable of not just surviving, but actively contributing to the mission's success. The intelligence briefing continued with detailed analysis of enemy aircraft capabilities, suspected pilot training levels, and the types of weapon systems that would likely be encountered. Sarah absorbed every detail, cross-referencing the information with tactical knowledge she had acquired through years of private study and simulation practice that went far beyond her official training requirements. The enemy fighters were identified as advanced variants equipped with beyond visual range missiles and sophisticated electronic warfare systems. Their pilots were believed to be experienced, possibly including foreign nationals with extensive combat experience from other conflicts. This would not be a training exercise with predictable enemy behavior and known parameters. Mission planning will commence immediately, Squadron Leader Reeves announced. Combat-rated pilots will be assigned primary intercept and air superiority roles. Support pilots will be evaluated for mission suitability and assigned appropriate tasks based on their demonstrated capabilities. As the formal briefing concluded and pilots began forming planning groups, Sarah approached Major Jennifer Walsh, the squadron's operations officer who would be responsible for making pilot assignments. Walsh was a former combat pilot herself, having flown 2 combat deployments before transitioning to staff duties following a promotion that required broader operational responsibilities. Major Walsh, Sarah said respectfully, I'd like to request consideration for a combat assignment in the upcoming operation. Walsh looked up from her planning materials with surprise. Sarah's request was unprecedented, representing the first time in 3 years that she had actively sought anything beyond her routine transport duties. Chun, I appreciate your willingness to contribute, but this is going to be a very challenging environment. Are you certain you're prepared for air-to-air combat against experienced enemy pilots? Ma'am, I understand the risks, but I also understand that you need every capable pilot you can get. I'm requesting the opportunity to demonstrate that I can contribute meaningfully to the mission. Walsh studied Sarah's face carefully, perhaps looking for signs of the overconfidence that sometimes led inexperienced pilots to volunteer for situations beyond their capabilities. Your training records show consistent performance in basic flight operations, but limited experience with combat scenarios. This isn't going to be a training exercise where mistakes can be corrected and lessons learned for next time. I understand that, ma'am. I'm not asking for a primary combat role, just the chance to prove that I can handle whatever assignment you think is appropriate. After a moment of consideration, Walsh nodded slowly. All right, Chen. Report to the simulator bay in 30 minutes. We're going to run you through some combat scenarios and see how you handle yourself under pressure. If you can demonstrate basic air-to-air competency, we'll consider giving you a supporting role in the operation. As Sarah walked toward the simulator bay, she could hear conversations among other pilots discussing the unusual situation of support personnel being evaluated for combat roles. The consensus seemed to be that desperate times called for desperate measures, but most doubted that transport pilots would be able to contribute meaningfully against experienced enemy fighters. Captain Morrison was particularly vocal in his skepticism. I get that we need numbers, but putting inexperienced pilots in harm's way isn't going to help anyone. It's just going to create more problems we'll have to solve while trying to complete the actual mission. The flight simulator bay contains 6 advanced F-16 simulators capable of replicating combat scenarios with remarkable fidelity. Sarah had used these systems occasionally for routine proficiency training, but never for the type of intensive air-to-air combat evaluation she was about to undergo. Major Walsh and 2 other instructor pilots were waiting with a prepared scenario designed to test basic fighter pilot skills under combat conditions. Chun, we're going to start with a simple 1 versus 1 engagement, Walsh explained as Sarah settled into the simulator cockpit. Enemy fighter at your 12 o'clock, range 20 miles, closing speed. Your mission is to engage and destroy the target while avoiding being shot down yourself. We'll evaluate your tactical decision-making, weapons employment, and defensive maneuvering. The scenario began with Sarah's simulated F-16 approaching the engagement area at medium altitude. Her radar display showed the enemy contact approaching from the north, range decreasing steadily as both aircraft closed on each other. According to the parameters displayed on her tactical screen, the enemy aircraft was an advanced fighter with capabilities similar to her own. For the first time in 3 years, Sarah abandoned the careful restraint that had characterized all her previous training exercises. Instead of the cautious, methodical approach that had earned her a reputation for excessive conservatism, she immediately began implementing advanced tactics that would surprise the evaluating instructors. She started by descending rapidly while turning slightly east, using terrain masking to break the enemy's radar lock while positioning herself for a flanking approach. The maneuver was aggressive and precisely executed, demonstrating an understanding of energy management and tactical geometry that went far beyond basic flight training. Walsh exchanged glances with the other instructors as they watched Sarah's approach. The confidence and sophistication of her initial moves suggested capabilities that were not reflected in her training records. This was not the flying of someone who barely qualified for combat consideration. Sarah's radar warning receiver indicated that the enemy aircraft was attempting to lock onto her with missiles, but her defensive maneuvering kept her position uncertain long enough for her to complete her flanking approach. When she finally achieved a firing position, her missile shot was perfectly timed and accurately placed, destroying the simulated enemy fighter before it could effectively respond. "Interesting approach, Chen," Walsh commented as the scenario reset. "Let's try something more challenging. 2 enemy fighters, this time with electronic jamming that will degrade your radar effectiveness. Show me how you handle a more complex, tactical situation." The second scenario was significantly more difficult, requiring Sarah to manage threats from multiple directions while dealing with degraded sensors and communication systems. Again, she immediately abandoned any pretense of cautious flying, instead demonstrating advanced tactics that utilized her aircraft strengths while exploiting weaknesses in the enemy formation. She used terrain and altitude changes to separate the 2 enemy fighters, engaging them individually rather than trying to fight both simultaneously. Her weapons employment was precise and efficient, conserving ammunition while achieving rapid kills against both targets. The instructors watching her performance were increasingly surprised by the sophistication of her tactical thinking. "Chen, where did you learn these techniques?" asked Captain Steve Richards, one of the instructor pilots observing the evaluation. This isn't the type of tactical knowledge typically covered in transport pilot training. Sarah hesitated, realizing that she was about to reveal the extent of her private study and preparation. "Sir, I've been studying advanced fighter tactics on my own time, using civilian flight simulation software and tactical manuals. I wanted to be prepared in case an opportunity like this ever arose." It was a partial truth that concealed the depth of her preparation while explaining her unexpected competence. She had indeed spent countless hours studying tactics and practicing scenarios, but her knowledge went far beyond what could be acquired through independent study. "Commander, Vasquez had provided access to classified tactical documents and advanced training materials that were normally restricted to active combat pilots." The third scenario tested Sarah's ability to function as part of a larger formation, requiring coordination with friendly aircraft while engaging multiple enemy threats. This was often where inexperienced pilots struggled most, as the complexity of managing communications, formation discipline, and individual tactics simultaneously challenged even experienced aviators. Sarah's performance in the formation scenario was perhaps most impressive to the evaluating instructors. She demonstrated an intuitive understanding of formation tactics, maintaining proper positioning while contributing effectively to the engagement. Her communication was clear and concise, providing useful information to other formation members, while responding appropriately to tactical directions from the flight leader. Major Walsh ended the evaluation after 45 minutes of increasingly challenging scenarios. Sarah had performed at a level that exceeded not only expectations for a support pilot, but also the standards typically demonstrated by newly assigned combat pilots. Her tactical thinking was sophisticated, her weapons employment was accurate, and her defensive flying showed the kind of instinctive skill that usually required extensive combat experience to develop. "Chun, I have to ask you directly," Walsh said as Sarah climbed out of the simulator. "Have you been deliberately underperforming in your previous training exercises? Because what I just witnessed doesn't match your official training records at all." Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that her answer would determine whether she finally received the opportunity she had been working toward for 3 years. "Ma'am, I've been following advice I received from a former instructor who suggested that revealing all your capabilities during training could be tactically disadvantageous. I may have taken that advice too far." Walsh stared at Sarah for several seconds, processing the implications of the admission. If Sarah had been deliberately concealing her abilities, it explained the disconnect between her mediocre training scores and the exceptional performance she had just demonstrated. It also raised questions about her judgment and honesty that could affect her suitability for combat assignments. "Chun, do you understand how serious this situation is? We're about to commit aircraft and pilots to a mission where the margin for error is essentially zero. I need to know that every pilot I assign is capable of performing at their absolute maximum level from the first minute of the engagement. Ma'am, I understand completely. What you saw in the simulator is my real capability level, and I'm prepared to prove it under actual combat conditions. After consulting briefly with the other instructor pilots, Walsh made her decision. All right, Chen, you're assigned to Blue Flight as wingman to Captain Morrison. Your job will be to stay in formation, follow orders precisely, and engage targets as directed. Do not attempt to be a hero. Do not break formation without explicit orders. And do not take unnecessary risks that could compromise the mission or other pilots. The assignment was exactly what Sarah had hoped for, a real combat role with an experienced flight leader who could provide guidance while allowing her to contribute meaningfully to the mission. Captain Morrison's reputation as an aggressive and successful pilot meant that Blue Flight would likely see significant action during the upcoming operation. As word of Sarah's assignment spread through the squadron, reactions were mixed. Some pilots expressed confidence in Major Walsh's judgment and willingness to give Sarah a chance to prove herself. Others worried that an unproven pilot in a critical mission could create problems that would affect everyone's survival. Captain Bradley approached Sarah as she prepared to attend the detailed mission briefing. Chun, I hope you know what you're getting into. Morrison's going to expect you to keep up with some very aggressive flying, and the enemy pilots we're facing aren't going to give you any consideration for being inexperienced. I understand that, sir. I'm prepared for whatever the mission requires. Are you? Bradley studied her face carefully. Because if you can't handle the pressure and you end up compromising Blue Flight's effectiveness, people are going to die. That's not a training exercise consequence. That's real pilots in real aircraft who won't be going home to their families. The weight of Bradley's words settled over Sarah as she realized the full magnitude of what she was about to undertake. 3 years of careful preparation had led to this moment. But all the simulation practice and theoretical study in the world couldn't completely prepare someone for the reality of life-or-death aerial combat against experienced enemy pilots. The detailed mission briefing revealed the complexity of the defensive operation being planned. Multiple flights of F-16s would be assigned to different sectors, providing air cover for ground forces while engaging enemy aircraft attempting to establish air superiority over the battlefield. Intelligence updates showed that enemy movements were proceeding ahead of schedule, requiring the defensive response to be accelerated. Blue Flight's assignment was to provide air cover for Firebase Delta, the same installation Sarah had been delivering supplies to just 24 hours earlier. The irony was not lost on her that she would be defending a location she knew well from her transport missions, possibly against the same enemy forces that Major Park had warned her were operating in the region. Captain Morrison briefed his flight on the specific tactics they would employ, emphasizing the importance of maintaining formation discipline while remaining flexible, enough to respond to rapidly changing tactical situations. As Blue Flight leader, Morrison would make tactical decisions for the entire formation, with wingmen expected to execute his orders precisely and immediately. Chun, Morrison said as the briefing concluded, I want you to understand that this isn't a training exercise where we can call a timeout if things get complicated. Once we're airborne and heading into the combat zone, you're going to be expected to perform at the same level as any other combat pilot. There won't be any allowances made for inexperience or nervousness. I understand, sir. I'm ready for this. Morrison studied her for a moment, perhaps trying to reconcile the confident pilot who had performed so well in the simulator with the transport pilot he had dismissed for 3 years. We'll find out soon enough. Gear up and be ready for launch in 30 minutes. And Chun, once we're in combat, forget everything you think you know about flying safely. Safe flying will get you killed out there. As Sarah walked toward the equipment room to collect her flight gear, she felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and nervousness that preceded any significant challenge. But beneath those surface emotions was a deeper sense of readiness that came from years of preparation finally finding its purpose. The moment she had been working toward was about to arrive, and she was as prepared as 3 years of dedicated study and practice could make her. The equipment room buzzed with activity. As pilots collected helmets, survival gear, and weapons for the upcoming mission. The atmosphere was professional but tense, with conversations focused on tactical details and equipment checks rather than the usual casual banter that preceded training flights. Everyone understood that this was different from anything they had done before. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez was supervising the equipment distribution, ensuring that each pilot received properly fitted gear and functional communication systems. When Sarah approached to collect her equipment, Rodriguez paused in his work to speak with her privately. "Lieutenant, I heard you got assigned to Blue Flight for the combat mission. I wanted you to know that I think Major Walsh made the right call. I've been watching pilots come and go for 15 years, and you've got something special. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." The unexpected vote of confidence meant more to Sarah than Rodriguez could know. His experience with military aviation gave his opinion significant weight, and his belief in her capabilities provided additional reassurance as she prepared for the most challenging mission of her career. As she suited up in her flight gear and checked her equipment, Sarah reflected on the path that had led to this moment. 3 years of deliberately concealed abilities, countless hours of private study and simulation practice, and the patient guidance of Commander Vasquez had all contributed to preparing her for exactly this type of situation. Now it remained to be seen whether that preparation would be sufficient for the realities of aerial combat. The pre-flight briefing for Blue Flight was conducted in a small conference room adjacent to the flight line, with Captain Morrison reviewing final tactical details and contingency plans. The mission profile called for a high-altitude approach to the combat zone, followed by patrol patterns designed to intercept enemy aircraft before they could reach their intended targets. "Remember," Morrison emphasized, "our primary mission is protecting the ground forces at Firebase Delta. We engage enemy aircraft to prevent them from attacking friendly positions, not to rack up individual kill scores. Stay focused on the mission objective, maintain formation discipline, and communicate everything you see to the rest of the flight." As they walked toward their aircraft, Sarah noticed unusual activity around the maintenance areas. Ground crews were working with intense focus to ensure that every aircraft was in perfect condition, understanding that mechanical failures during this mission could have consequences far beyond routine maintenance issues. The F-16C assigned to Sarah for the mission was aircraft number 892047, a veteran fighter that had been maintained in excellent condition by Rodriguez's crew. As she conducted her pre-flight inspection, Sarah paid particular attention to the weapon systems and electronic countermeasures that would be critical for survival in the expected threat environment. The aircraft was loaded with a full complement of air-to-air missiles, including both short-range heat-seeking weapons for close range engagements and longer-range radar-guided missiles for beyond visual range combat. The sophisticated radar and electronic warfare systems would provide her with the information needed to detect and engage enemy aircraft while protecting herself from incoming threats. As Sarah completed her pre-flight checks and prepared to start the engine, she realized that she was about to cross a threshold that would fundamentally change her military career. Whether the mission was successful or not, whether she performed well or poorly, she would never again be the anonymous transport pilot who had spent 3 years in the background of squadron operations. The engine start procedure went smoothly, with all systems indicating normal operation. Radio checks confirmed that communication systems were functioning properly, and her radar display showed clear reception of friendly aircraft preparing for departure. Around her, other pilots were completing similar preparations for what would be the largest combat operation any of them had ever participated in. Tower control cleared Blue Flight for takeoff, and Sarah found herself following Captain Morrison's aircraft down the runway and into the morning sky. As Thunderbolt Air Station fell away beneath them, she realized that the next few hours would determine whether 3 years of careful preparation had been worth the risks she had taken and the reputation she had sacrificed. The formation climbed steadily toward their assigned altitude, heading east toward the combat zone, where enemy and allied forces were already beginning to clash. Sarah maintained precise formation position while monitoring her instruments and communication systems, preparing for the moment when they would transition from routine flight operations to active combat. Part 3. The Proving Ground. The morning sun painted the distant mountains in shades of gold and crimson as Blue Flight climbed through 25,000 feet, heading toward the combat zone where intelligence reports indicated enemy formations were already massing for their coordinated assault. Sarah maintained perfect formation position off Captain Morrison's right wing, her aircraft systems humming with the quiet efficiency that marked a well-maintained F-16 prepared for battle. The radio chatter was minimal as the four-ship formation proceeded toward their assigned patrol area. Morrison led the flight with the calm professionalism that had made him the squadron's most successful pilot, while his 3 wingmen maintained the disciplined silence that characterized experienced combat formations approaching hostile territory. Sarah found herself checking and rechecking her weapons systems, ensuring that every missile and gun was ready for immediate employment. Blue Flight, this is Thunderbolt Control, came the radio call from the Air Operations Center. Be advised, multiple enemy formations detected crossing the border at various points. Estimated 40-plus hostile aircraft inbound toward Allied positions. You are cleared to engage any aircraft displaying hostile intent in your assigned sector. Morrison's voice came through the formation frequency with the steady calm that Sarah had observed during training flights. Blue Flight copies. Proceeding to patrol area Bravo. Weapons are hot. Repeat, weapons are hot. The authorization to engage hostile aircraft transformed the routine flight into active combat operations. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she realized that everything she had prepared for over the past 3 years was about to be tested against real opponents, who were equally determined to complete their mission and return home safely. The tactical display in Sarah's cockpit began showing multiple contacts as their formation approached the contested airspace. Enemy aircraft appeared as red symbols moving in coordinated patterns that suggested well-planned offensive operations. The sheer number of contacts was sobering, confirming intelligence estimates that Allied forces would be significantly outnumbered in the upcoming engagement. Blue 2, contact bearing 090, range 30 miles, multiple aircraft. Morrison called, directing the formation's attention to a cluster of enemy fighters approaching from the east. Appears to be 4-ship formation, probably armed for air-to-ground attack against Firebase Delta. Sarah's radar confirmed the contact, showing 4 aircraft flying in tactical formation at medium altitude. Their flight profile suggested they were indeed configured for ground attack, carrying the external weapons loads necessary to damage or destroy the fortified positions where Allied ground forces were preparing their defense. Blue Lead Blue 4, came the voice of Lieutenant Marcus Webb, the formation's newest pilot. I'm also showing contacts to the north, range 25 miles. Looks like coordinated attack from multiple directions. The tactical situation was developing exactly as intelligence had predicted. Enemy forces were attempting to overwhelm Allied defenses through simultaneous attacks from multiple directions, forcing the outnumbered defenders to spread their resources across too many threats to handle effectively. Morrison processed the information quickly, making the command decisions that would determine how Blue Flight engaged the developing threat. Blue Flight, We're going to take the eastern formation first, then reassess based on how the situation develops. Maintain formation until I call for the split. Chen, stay on my wing and follow my lead. Sarah acknowledged the order while studying the tactical geometry of the approaching engagement. The enemy formation was maintaining a steady course and altitude that would bring them within missile range in approximately 3 minutes. Their behavior suggested confidence in their mission parameters and possibly incomplete awareness of the defending fighter presence. The distance closed rapidly as both formations converged on the same piece of airspace. Sarah's radar warning receiver remained quiet, indicating that the enemy aircraft had not yet detected Blue Flight's presence. This tactical advantage would be critical for achieving successful intercepts before the enemy could react defensively or alter their attack profiles. Blue Flight, this is Blue Lead. Prepare for engagement. Target assignment as follows. Blue 1 and 2 will take the lead pair. Blue 3 and 4 will engage the trail aircraft. Execute on my mark. Sarah's assigned target was the number 2 aircraft in the enemy formation, flying as wingman to the lead fighter that Morrison would engage. The tactical logic was sound, as eliminating the formation leader and his wingmen simultaneously would disrupt the enemy's command structure and defensive coordination. Her weapons system was locked and ready, with a beyond visual range missile selected for the initial engagement. The sophisticated radar guidance system had achieved a solid lock on her assigned target, indicating optimal conditions for a high-probability kill shot. Sarah's finger hovered over the weapon release button, waiting for Morrison's command to begin the engagement. Fox 3, Morrison called, indicating that he had launched a radar-guided missile at his target. Blue Flight is engaged. Sarah immediately pressed her own weapon release button, feeling the slight jolt as the missile separated from her aircraft and began its autonomous flight toward the enemy formation. Blue 2, Fox 3, she called, confirming her missile launch and adding to the tactical picture that all formation members needed to maintain. The enemy formation reacted immediately to the missile launch, breaking their disciplined formation, as individual aircraft maneuvered desperately to avoid the incoming weapons. Sarah watched her radar display as the tactical situation transformed from an orderly interception into the chaotic free-for-all that characterized most air-to-air combat. Morrison's missile found its target, destroying the enemy formation leader in a brilliant flash that was visible even at their current range. Sarah's weapon tracked her assigned target through several defensive maneuvers before achieving impact, eliminating the second enemy aircraft and reducing the threat to Firebase Delta by half. Good kill, Blue 2, Morrison called, acknowledging Sarah's successful engagement. Reform on me, we've got more customers inbound from the north. The brief engagement had lasted less than 30 seconds, but it had fundamentally changed Sarah's status within the squadron. Her missile shot had been tactically sound and accurately delivered, demonstrating combat competence that matched or exceeded the performance of more experienced pilots. The successful engagement proved that her simulator performance had translated effectively to real-world combat conditions. The northern enemy formation was approaching rapidly, forcing Blue Flight to reposition for a second engagement while dealing with the remaining aircraft from the first group. The tactical complexity was increasing as multiple threats converged on their patrol area, requiring split-second decisions about target prioritization and engagement tactics. Blue Lead, Blue 3, came Webb's voice, tension evident as he reported his tactical situation. I'm being painted by hostile radar. Request permission to engage defensively. Morrison's response was immediate. Blue 3, you are cleared to engage. All aircraft, watch for missile launches from the northern group. They're probably carrying long-range weapons. Sarah's radar warning receiver activated almost simultaneously with Morrison's warning, indicating that enemy aircraft were attempting to achieve missile locks on Blue Flight. The tactical situation was shifting from a successful intercept to a defensive engagement, where survival would depend on individual pilot skill and formation coordination. The first enemy missile appeared on Sarah's threat display as a rapidly approaching contact from the northeast. The weapon was still several miles away, but its speed and trajectory indicated that evasive action would be required within seconds. She initiated a defensive turn while dispensing chaff and flares to confuse the missile's guidance system. Morrison's voice cut through the radio chatter with urgent tactical information. Multiple missiles in the air, blue flight. Defensive maneuvers, maintain mutual support. Sarah rolled her aircraft into a steep diving turn, using gravity and engine power to build speed while maneuvering to defeat the incoming missile. Her electronic countermeasures were working effectively, causing the enemy weapon to lose its lock and pass harmlessly to her left. The defensive maneuver had worked, but it had also separated her from Morrison's protective formation. Blue 2. Where are you? Morrison called, his voice reflecting concern about losing formation integrity during active combat. Blue 2 is south of your position, maneuvering back to formation, Sarah replied while scanning for threats in friendly aircraft. The violent defensive maneuvering had left her temporarily isolated in airspace filled with enemy fighters, creating exactly the kind of vulnerable situation that inexperienced pilots often failed to survive. Her radar display showed multiple contacts in all directions, with some aircraft maneuvering aggressively in what appeared to be air-to-air combat, and others continuing toward their original ground attack objectives. The tactical picture was confused and rapidly changing, requiring constant assessment and decision-making that tested every aspect of pilot training and experience. An enemy fighter appeared on Sarah's radar at close range, approaching from her left side in what appeared to be an attack position. The aircraft was close enough that visual identification was possible, revealing a sleek fighter design that matched intelligence descriptions of the enemy's most capable air-to-air platforms. Sarah reacted instinctively, pulling her aircraft into a tight climbing turn while rolling to present a more difficult target aspect to the enemy pilot. The maneuver was executed with precision that would have surprised her squadron mates, demonstrating the advanced tactical flying that she had practiced for years in preparation for exactly this type of situation. The enemy pilot responded aggressively, attempting to follow Sarah's maneuver and achieve a firing position. What followed was a classic dogfight, with both aircraft maneuvering violently through three-dimensional space as each pilot tried to gain the tactical advantage necessary for a successful weapons engagement. Sarah's training with Commander Vasquez had included extensive practice in close-range air combat maneuvering, emphasizing the energy management and tactical geometry that determine success or failure in dogfighting situations. She used every technique she had learned, combining altitude changes with precise turn timing to maintain defensive position while looking for opportunities to reverse the situation. The enemy pilot was skilled and aggressive, maintaining pursuit through several defensive maneuvers while attempting to achieve the brief firing opportunity that would end the engagement. Sarah could see the enemy aircraft clearly now, close enough to observe the pilot's helmet and the weapon systems mounted beneath the aircraft's wings. After 30 seconds of intensive maneuvering, Sarah recognized an opportunity as the enemy pilot made a slight tactical error, pulling too aggressively in a climbing turn that bled off critical airspeed. She immediately reversed her turn and pulled her aircraft's nose toward the enemy fighter, achieving the firing position she had been working to create. Her short-range heat-seeking missile locked onto the enemy aircraft's engine signature immediately, the distinctive tone in her headset confirming that the weapon was ready for launch. Sarah pressed the weapon release button and called out her engagement. Blue 2, Fox 2, close-range engagement. The missile tracked perfectly to its target, destroying the enemy fighter in a spectacular explosion that left debris scattered across several miles of sky. Sarah had achieved her second kill of the mission, demonstrating combat effectiveness that would forever change how her squadron mates viewed her capabilities. "Outstanding, Blue 2. Morrison's voice came through the radio with genuine admiration. "Form up on me, we've got more work to do." Sarah maneuvered to rejoin Morrison's aircraft, but the tactical situation continued to develop around them. Additional enemy formations were approaching Firebase Delta from multiple directions, and the limited number of Allied fighters was being stretched beyond their ability to intercept every threat simultaneously. "Blue Lead, this is Firebase Delta. Control," came an urgent radio call from the ground forces they were protecting. "We're taking incoming artillery fire and need immediate air support against enemy ground positions. Can you provide close air support?" Morrison faced the difficult tactical decision of whether to continue air-to-air operations or shift to ground attack missions. The choice would determine whether Blue Flight continued hunting enemy fighters or began attacking the ground forces that were threatening Allied positions. "Blue Flight, we're going to split our mission," Morrison decided. "Blue 3 and 4, continue air-to-air patrol. Blue 1 and 2 will provide close air support for Firebase Delta. Chun, stay with me and follow my lead on the ground attack run." The mission change required Sarah to shift her tactical thinking from air-to-air combat to ground attack operations, a transition that demanded different skills and different weapons employment techniques. Ground attack flying was often more dangerous than air-to-air combat, requiring pilots to fly at low altitude within range of surface-to-air weapons while accurately delivering ordnance against small, well-defended targets. Morrison led the way toward Firebase Delta, descending to attack altitude while communicating with ground controllers to identify priority targets. The tactical situation on the ground was developing rapidly, with enemy forces advancing on multiple axes toward the Allied defensive positions. "Blue Flight, this is Firebase Delta Control. Priority targets are enemy armor concentrations, approximately 2 kilometers north of our position. Be advised, heavy anti-aircraft activity in the target area." Sarah could see the battlefield clearly as they approached at low altitude. Smoke and explosions marked the locations where ground combat was taking place, while enemy vehicles maneuvered across open terrain toward the Allied positions. The scene was chaotic and violent, with friendly and enemy forces engaged in close combat that would make accurate airstrikes extremely challenging. Morrison identified the target area and began his attack run, diving toward a concentration of enemy armored vehicles while Sarah maintained formation position. The approach required flying through intense anti-aircraft fire, with tracers and missile launches creating a deadly gauntlet that every attack aircraft would have to navigate. "Blue 1 is in hot," Morrison called, indicating that he was beginning his weapons delivery run. Sarah watched as he maneuvered toward the target area, releasing his ordnance with the precision that had made him the squadron's most successful pilot. Morrison's attack was successful, destroying several enemy vehicles and disrupting their coordinated advance toward Firebase Delta. But the mission requirements called for multiple attack runs to eliminate the entire enemy formation, meaning that Sarah would soon be making her own ground attack run through the same dangerous airspace. "Blue 2, you're cleared for your attack run," Morrison called as he pulled out of his dive and began climbing away from the target area. "Same target area, watch for missile launches from your 10 o'clock position." Sarah rolled into her attack dive, configuring her weapon systems for ground attack while maintaining awareness of the anti-aircraft threats that surrounded the target area. The approach required precise flying to achieve accurate weapons delivery while avoiding the surface-to-air missiles that were being launched by enemy air defense systems. The target area grew larger in her windscreen as she descended through the defensive fire, her weapon system calculating the optimal release point for maximum effectiveness against the enemy armored formation. Sarah had practiced ground attack techniques extensively during her years of private preparation, but this was her first opportunity to employ those skills under actual combat conditions. At the calculated release point, Sarah pickled off her ordnance and immediately began a maximum performance climb to escape the target area. Behind her, explosions marked the impact points of her weapons, achieving direct hits on several enemy vehicles and contributing to the disruption of their offensive operations. "Excellent work, Blue 2, came Morrison's acknowledgement as Sarah rejoined formation. Direct hits on multiple targets. "Firebase Delta, Blue Flight has completed initial attack run. Assess damage and advise if additional strikes are required." The ground controller's response confirmed the effectiveness of their attack. "Blue Flight, this is Firebase Delta Control. Enemy advance has been halted in the northern sector. We're seeing enemy forces withdrawing from several positions." Outstanding work. But the tactical situation was far from resolved. Sarah's radar display continued to show multiple enemy aircraft operating in the area, and radio communications indicated that other Allied positions were under similar attack. The success at Firebase Delta was just one engagement in a larger battle that would continue for several more hours. "Blue Lead, this is Thunderbolt Control," came a priority radio call from the Air Operations Center. "Be advised, large enemy formation detected approaching Outpost Charlie, approximately 40 miles northwest of your current position. All available aircraft are directed to intercept." Morrison acknowledged the new mission while assessing Blue Flight's current status. They had expended some of their air-to-air missiles during the earlier engagements, but still retained sufficient weaponry for additional combat operations. The fuel situation was manageable, though extended combat operations would eventually require consideration of return to base timing. "Blue Flight, we're going to Outpost Charlie," Morrison announced. "Reform and climb to intercept altitude. This one looks like it's going to be a major engagement." As Blue Flight climbed toward the new intercept area, Sarah reflected on the morning's events with a mixture of satisfaction and amazement. In the space of 2 hours, she had transitioned from transport pilot to combat veteran, achieving multiple air-to-air kills and contributing to successful ground support operations. The performance had validated 3 years of careful preparation and demonstrated capabilities that would forever change her role within the squadron. The approach to Outpost Charlie revealed the largest enemy formation any of them had yet encountered. Sarah's radar display showed more than 20 aircraft in multiple formations, apparently coordinating a massive assault on the strategically important outpost. The enemy had committed significant resources to this attack, suggesting that Outpost Charlie's destruction was a high-priority objective. "Blue Flight, this is Thunderbolt Control. Additional Allied fighters are en route to your position, but you'll be first on scene. Engage as able and maintain contact until reinforcements arrive." Morrison studied the tactical display before making his engagement decision. "Blue Flight, we're going to hit the lead formation and try to disrupt their attack coordination. Stay in formation until we commit, then engage targets of opportunity. Remember, our job is to buy time for the cavalry to arrive." The engagement that followed was the most intensive air combat that any of Blue Flight had ever experienced. Multiple enemy formations maneuvered aggressively to complete their ground attack mission while defending against Allied interceptors. The airspace became a 3-dimensional battlefield where split-second decisions determined survival. Sarah found herself separated from Morrison during the initial engagement, forcing her to operate independently while maintaining situational awareness in an environment filled with hostile aircraft. Her training and preparation served her well, as she successfully engaged multiple enemy fighters while avoiding becoming a target herself. The individual engagements blurred together in a continuous series of tactical decisions and weapons employment. Sarah's precise flying and accurate shooting resulted in several additional kills, contributing significantly to the Allied effort to prevent enemy forces from reaching their intended targets. When reinforcements finally arrived, the tactical situation had been stabilized through the efforts of the outnumbered Allied pilots who had bought critical time for the larger defensive response to develop. Sarah had personally accounted for 6 enemy aircraft destroyed, exceeding the 5 kills required for A status and establishing herself as one of the most successful pilots in the entire engagement. The return to Thunderbolt Air Station was accomplished in formation with other Allied aircraft that had participated in the defensive operations. Radio chatter revealed that the enemy offensive had been successfully defeated, with Allied air superiority maintained despite being significantly outnumbered at the beginning of the engagement. As Blue Flight entered the traffic pattern at Thunderbolt, Sarah could see that the base was bustling with activity as other aircraft returned from various combat missions. The successful defense had required every available pilot and aircraft, validating the decision to include support personnel in combat operations. The landing was routine, a stark contrast to the intensity of the morning's combat operations. As Sarah taxied to the parking area, she could see ground crews and squadron personnel waiting to debrief the returning pilots and assess the results of the day's operations. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez was waiting as Sarah shut down her aircraft, his expression reflecting pride and vindication. "Lieutenant, I heard the radio chatter. 6 kills on your first combat mission. I told you that you had something special." The post-mission debriefing revealed the full scope of the morning's success. Allied forces had defeated a coordinated enemy offensive that could have changed the strategic balance in the region. The performance of individual pilots had been exceptional, with several achieving A status during the intensive combat operations. Squadron Leader Reeves addressed the assembled pilots with obvious satisfaction. "Ladies and gentlemen, today you proved that American air power remains the finest in the world. The enemy committed significant resources to their offensive, and you sent them home with their tails between their legs." When Reeves announced the individual kill totals, Sarah's performance drew surprised murmurs from pilots who had dismissed her capabilities for 3 years. 6 confirmed kills in a single mission was an exceptional achievement for any pilot, but particularly remarkable for someone making their combat debut. Captain Morrison approached Sarah after the formal debriefing, his expression reflecting the complete revision of his previous assessment. "Chen, I owe you an apology. What you did today was some of the finest flying I've ever witnessed. Your tactical instincts and shooting accuracy were outstanding." The acknowledgement from Morrison carried significant weight within the squadron, as his reputation for high standards and honest assessment made his praise particularly meaningful. Other pilots began approaching Sarah with congratulations and expressions of newfound respect for her demonstrated capabilities. Major Walsh found Sarah as the celebration was winding down, pulling her aside for a private conversation. "Chen, we need to talk about your future assignment. Your performance today has changed a lot of perceptions about your capabilities and potential." The conversation that followed resulted in Sarah's immediate reassignment to full combat status, with a recommendation for accelerated promotion and consideration for advanced fighter pilot training. The careful facade of mediocrity that had protected her for 3 years was permanently replaced by recognition as one of the squadron's most capable pilots. Colonel Hayes personally presented Sarah with the Distinguished Flying Cross at a ceremony the following week, acknowledging her exceptional performance during the defensive operations. The citation noted her 6 confirmed kills, her successful ground attack missions, and her contribution to the overall success of the Allied defensive effort. As Sarah stood at attention during the award ceremony, she reflected on the path that had led to this moment. 3 years of deliberate concealment had given way to dramatic revelation, proving that sometimes the greatest strength comes from patience and preparation rather than immediate recognition. The squadron's dynamic had fundamentally changed following the combat operations. Sarah was no longer the transport pilot who occupied the background of squadron activities, but rather a respected combat veteran whose tactical insights and demonstrated skill made her a valued member of the team. Captain Morrison requested Sarah as his permanent wingman for future combat operations, a partnership that would prove highly successful in subsequent missions. The mutual respect and tactical compatibility that had developed during their first combat mission together formed the foundation for one of the squadron's most effective fighting partnerships. In the months that followed, Sarah's reputation continued to grow as additional combat operations confirmed her exceptional abilities. Her final tally of enemy aircraft destroyed would eventually reach 15, making her one of the most successful fighter pilots of her generation and proving that sometimes the most dangerous opponents are those who reveal nothing until the moment when everything depends on their skill. The transformation from dismissed transport pilot to legendary fighter ace became a story told throughout military aviation circles, inspiring other pilots who felt underestimated and proving that true capability often lies hidden beneath carefully constructed facades. Sarah Chen had finally found her place in the sky, and the results spoke for themselves in the most definitive language possible: victory in aerial combat against determined and skilled opponents. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.